Everyone. We have now reached the concluding session and the most awaited session of the Day 2 of FICCI HEAL conference. We have had two very exciting days, starting with the opening session and FICCI Healthcare Excellence Awards yesterday, which was followed by a keynote address by Mr. Mohandas Pai on impact of COVID on society and culture. And thereafter, two streams of sessions, business and scientific, that included deliberations on changing landscape of pharma as well as diagnostics, the need for restructuring our healthcare facilities as well as HR models, and scientific part of the COVID-19 response from hospitals and clinicians. The inaugural session was graced by Honorable Vice President of India yesterday, and a very inspiring address from him. And today we had a very successful innovation bootcamp for healthcare startups and entrepreneurs along with the MedTech session. I am now delighted to announce the interactive session between Professor Arvind Panagariya, Professor of Economics, and the Jagdish Bhagwati, Professor of Indian Political Economy, Columbia University, and Dr. Alok Roy, the chairperson of FICCI Health Services Committee. Dr. Panagariya was unable to join us personally, but he very graciously agreed to do a pre-recorded session with us. And that is the session that we are going to be airing now. A brief introduction, although he doesn't need one. Dr. Panagariya he served as the first vice chairman of the Niti Aayog, Government of India, in the rank of cabinet minister. During these years, he also served as the India's G20 Sherpa and led the Indian teams that negotiated the G20 communiques. Dr. Panagariya also is a former chief economist of the Asian Development Bank and has been the faculty of Department of Economics at the University of Maryland at College Park. During these years, he also worked with the World Bank, IMF, and UNCTAD in various capacities. He holds a PhD degree of economics from Princeton University and has authored more than 15 books. And he has been a true friend of FICCI all these years when he was in India and even before he came to India as the vice chairperson. So we now start the session with Dr. Panagariya and Dr. Alok Roy. Please play the video.
Thank you, Shobha. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Arvind Panagariya, who's a man who hails from Rajasthan. And as you all know, that as has been introduced by Shobha, he is being held in very high esteem in our country when it comes to economics and its prediction and his statements on that. With this, I would like to request Professor Arvind to speak few words about what he feels, how the corona pandemic has affected economy of this country and around the globe. Professor Panagariya.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. Very pleased to be with you. Sorry I could not be there live due to conflicts with my teaching of the classes at Columbia University. Let me just first say a few words about the pandemic itself, how it is impacting various countries. And then I want to come and focus on the Indian economy. So, based on the absolute number of daily new cases that are reported currently, the Johns Hopkins University on its portal, which gives extensive reporting every day and updates the data, it lists, among the top 10 countries that it lists. So this is, as I said, based on the absolute number of daily new cases. So India today is those cases on a daily basis, followed by the United States, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Spain, France, Peru, Russia. These are countries other than India from the American continent, North and South America. None from Africa, actually. But of course, this also reflects the country size. And India being an extremely large country, 1.3 billion people, naturally has very large number of large absolute number of cases. Now, if you really scale it by population, then of course India is not the one with the highest. India will clearly come out behind the United States and Brazil, both of those, but perhaps behind some of the other countries as well. So one should keep that in mind. I think we really look at these very large absolute numbers, and that's how we interpret everything. But one needs to scale it by the population. Indeed, if you go by the deaths, then India actually has dealt with the menace rather well. Among the top 20 countries facing these infections today, based on deaths per million population. Among those 20 countries, India is actually the last one. And even as a proportion of the infections, the death rate in India is extremely low. It is at the bottom 2 or 3, depending on which day we are talking about, because the infections themselves fluctuate. So there is this sort of rough roadmap of where cases today exist. But of course, the disconcerting feature of the infection in India is that these cases are still rising. The additional new cases every day are still on the upward trend. Many countries have had 2 waves, but I don't think we really had 2 waves. What happened was that initially we actually did quite well. If you look at the graphs across countries, in the initial months, so when people say that we went into too strict a lockdown, I think they don't realize actually that we bought a lot of good time to beef up our medical supplies in terms of masks, PPEs, and ventilators, but also to build up our defenses in terms of infrastructure, broader infrastructure on health. So that period actually during which our infections remained relatively lower. Was if you look at the graphs of the other countries, India actually did well. So lockdown was effective, is what I would say, in limiting the infections early on. But subsequently, I think we have not been able to sustain that same effort. I think it is very difficult, and as the United States, Brazil, and all the other countries have discovered as well. And so we are still struggling with it. Obviously, the deaths have also gone up. Now we are having 11 to 1200 deaths per day. This is still large, and for us that's a bigger challenge because our medical facilities are more limited. Unlike some of the developed countries, which have very well-developed systems of hospitals and clinics and so forth, we have very limited of resources on that front. So I think going forward, it's probably going to be a bigger challenge. Let me turn to the economy. I think that is where I can perhaps give you better value added. And so on the economic front, what has happened is that as expected, our lockdown was tough, severe. And so during the April, May, June quarter, that's the first quarter of our fiscal year 21, the GDP decline has been quite large, 24%, 23.9. This may get revised upward or downward later on, but that is the current kind of preliminary figure, which is quite large. Now, compared to other countries, well, some countries are in similar kind of ballpark. United Kingdom, 21.7% decline. Spain, 22.1% decline. Germany less. I think Germany handled COVID better, and that shows up in the numbers. 11.7% decline for Germany. Now, United States, actually, the first wave was largely New York State. And so economic hit was about, somewhere between 9 to 10% of the GDP in this quarter. But I think, the next quarter, meaning that quarter that follows from July, August, September, their we might actually see larger shift because a larger decline, because the infection has spread much more so in the second wave. Geographically, it has been much more widespread than in the first wave. So we'll see what happens there. So that's roughly, internationally how the economies have been impacted. I would just say a few words on what we did or what we should be doing, really. Now I want to look forward a little bit. And clearly, the economy needs the shoulder of both the central bank, Reserve Bank of India, and of the government. My recommendations are that, on the as far as the Reserve Bank of India is concerned, I think now, as we have done the unlocking of the economy, workers are returning. If you look at the trains coming into places like Mumbai, Delhi, cities of Gujarat, and so forth, these are destinations for the migrant workers. They're coming, with 100% capacity. They're running full. So signs are that people are returning, but still hesitant. So it's not like the entire workforce is back to work. Far from it. But as that happens, I think supply response becomes feasible, which was not the case during the very tough lockdown. So there, I think RBI needs to help the aggregate demand a bit. I would worry a lot less about inflation right now in an economy in which supplies will now be rising. I think it help mitigate the inflation, and therefore the case for this central bank helping aggregate demand through perhaps further lowering of interest rates, some monetary expansion is very much strong. So I would say that's one. Second, I think the RBI also needs to pay attention to the exchange rate. In recent times, in the last 2 or 3 months, perhaps, very large inflows of foreign capital have led to appreciation of the rupee, and we actually need to the rupee to return to its depreciated rate, because that is what determines the competitiveness of our goods in the global marketplace. We have perhaps lost some bit of export share, and we need to regain that. And so that also helps the aggregate demand a bit. So those are the two things I would say for the RBI. For the government of India, this is the time now, if we want to go with a little bit more fiscal. And I think there's a good case advice, we go through infrastructure spending, expand that more rapidly, and particularly the projects that are already underway, accelerate those, because starting new projects takes time. So what we ought to do is, existing projects, speed them up, any bottlenecks that exist, remove those quickly and get going. And because infrastructure buildup will also create jobs, it's very labor-intensive activity, and that will try to restore confidence of the people. Households need to become confident, because right now, even transfers are not going very far because they are converting into precautionary savings. They are not translating into expansion of private consumption. So that confidence needs to be restored. So if we really begin to show increased employment, particularly through these kinds of infrastructure projects, that will help. So that's first thing. Second, recapitalization of the public sector banks, very essential. I think we made a mistake from 2014 to 17. We waited too long, and initial recapitalization we did with 70,000 crores was too little. It was known that it was too little. I think we should not repeat that mistake. We should go full steam right now and preemptively actually try to recapitalize the banks, because it's a foregone conclusion that even if we today kind of postpone that by restructuring of many of these loans that would otherwise become NPAs, down the road, more NPAs will come. I mean, it is a foregone conclusion. So that's the second thing. Third, now that calls need for revenue, and this is where privatization and monetization of assets is extremely important. I think this is time for the government, particularly the DIPAM, Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, to move ahead at a very aggressive pace to privatize the public sector enterprises, but also for the other ministries to monetize many of the assets. These are roads, ports, airports, transmission lines, and so forth. So we got lots of these public assets. There will be a lot of private interest in leasing them on long term, and that will get the government revenues. So that is the rough kind of set of recommendations I would make at this point. And let me stop there. We can take up more in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And it was a great insight. And as you have said that you did mention that in second quarter, you expect the economies to further, GDP to fall further because there has not been any correction in last the current quarter, as we are today on 30th September, which is the end of second quarter. So you expect GDP to tumble further down. And as you have said correctly, that to steer it back into the path, you have mentioned a couple of things: central bank, role of government, and need for the revenue and privatization. Sir, we would like to hear from you that FICCI had done a small survey. They had predicted there will be contraction of industries, and they had some study where they said that up to 11% contraction will happen in industry and in services, approximately 3%, and which includes healthcare sector as well. We'd like to have your views on that. And sir, while I'm on it, and today being 30th September, I wish you a very happy birthday, which happens to be your birthday too, sir. And it's a privilege to have you on your birthday. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. So that correct a little bit. Thanks for your good wishes. After the quarter for which the data came, and which is what I described, which is the April, May, June quarter, I think we are seeing some better activity in the economy in the following quarter, June, July, August, particularly July and August, June also. So the decline of about 23.9% that we have recorded, that the MOSPI, our Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, has recorded, is large. And so I expect that this will be smaller in the following quarter, but it will be a decline, is how it looks to me. We are not returning yet to the level of activity in the FY21 where we were in FY20 in the same quarter. So I think it will still be a decline, but perhaps less. Now, as you said, the numbers on industry and services are actually large. What has happened, at least for the quarter for which we have the numbers, agriculture has held its own. So agriculture, in fact, showed a growth of 3.4%, which is pretty close to its trend growth. But the problem, of course, is that agriculture is less than 15% of the economy in terms of output. In terms of employment, it's much larger. We got almost more than 2/5 of the workforce in agriculture. But output-wise, it's not even one. It's close to about 1/6 or so, or not even that. So that's the problem. And it therefore doesn't add the whole. So the big declines that have happened, right? Those are in things like transportation, hotels, manufacturing. These are the sectors, where very large declines have happened. Financial services have done okay. They've fallen, but only about up to 5% or so. Public administration, as it is called, also has fallen about 10%. Now, this is where we count education and health, but we don't know the disaggregated number. What exactly has happened? You would know more on the details of what is happening in the health sector specifically. But roughly, that's the roadmap. And my take has been that, look, the recovery very much depends on how well we can recover against COVID. I think that's, if COVID continues to be on the kind of rampage that it is currently, the problem is that workers will not really return to their workplaces. Some work can be done remotely, but really not everything. Most of the things in India, particularly in services we do, require your presence in the workplace. And as long as the threat of COVID remains, workers will hesitate to go. I mean, I'm myself hesitant to go, and I'm teaching both my classes this semester at Columbia online. And so that really is going, so recovery is going to depend very much on, I suppose ultimately, therefore, when the vaccine comes, there the news seems good, that people are saying that by the end of this year or by January 21, we should get
that would complete almost 1 year of COVID pandemic in the world.
Yes, absolutely.
And by time vaccine, if it comes and gets implemented, it would be 1 year over. Maybe we will well into first quarter next year. So what would you like to predict that in case it is going to happen? Vaccines are not going to come before December, January. They're not going to come before December, January.
Right.
Then that means that we will kind of prediction like that for the world economy and for the healthcare.
Yeah. So look, this is a very uncertain environment. And what I predict today may get falsified in another month or two. And we know this from the recent history, that what was being predicted in February or January went completely out of the window by the end of March. And even what we then started predicting again by March or early April, we thought that we'll flatten the curve, and so we'll then be able to get back to work and so forth. We found out that after the lockdown was undone, how rapidly the infection spread. So I would not hazard. I think normally I would take a best shot, but I would not hazard at sort of some sort of number now for the year as a whole. It is certain that the growth will fall. I mean, just take the arithmetics of it, that 24% decline has happened in the first quarter already. Now, even if we could have actually returned to the same level of GDP as last year in the remaining 3 quarters, just by arithmetics, this 24% will translate into a 6%, divide by 4, so roughly 6% decline in the GDP and on an annualized basis. So, and that of course is very optimistic that we will get back to the fiscal year 20 level of GDP in fiscal year 21 in the remaining 3 quarters. It is highly unlikely. I mean, we know that in the second quarter we have not got to that level because activity is far from, every indicator shows improvement, but it's not showing that we are back to where we were last year. So I, you can see that 6% more or less gives you the floor for what is to come in terms of the decline, but it is going to be larger. How much larger? That is one thing I'll not hazard a guess on.
But there are going to be difficult times coming in the economy.
No doubt. No, look, one thing is clear, that this is the worst shock that we have ever seen. On the record, in terms of the economic shock, there's nothing bigger than that exists. We had the Great Depression, and we had the global financial crisis, and whatever else, other pandemics and all, but nothing was this serious. Globally, every country got shocked, and in a massive way. So it is something we ought to be humble about.
Sir, we would like to have your views on what do you think impact on Indian health sector? Is it different from other economies, developed one or other nations? Is there any pattern in the impact on healthcare? Because we feel that our healthcare has been very, very deeply impacted. We don't have patients. They don't come to our hospital. We only get COVID patients. So our cost has gone up. Certain sector of almost 2/3 of the hospital, though is employed, but doesn't contribute anyway in revenue generation. Only probably 1/3 or 1/4 contributes to economy, to the hospital economy. So what do you think? How has it impacted in India and in other countries?
So Dr. Roy, I don't know a lot of other countries, but US, I live in the United States, so this I know that here also the impact has been very much along those same lines. That patients themselves, anything that they can postpone, they are postponing. So patients simply are not going for any other treatment except when it is an emergency and it's a matter of life and death. There was a period during which in New York City, when this was on COVID was very much on its peak, for other diseases, actually, the hospitals were refusing the services as well. And so only the hospitals that were actually dealing with COVID were the ones that were were having patients. I can tell you myself, I've been overdue for my annual medical checkup for quite a few months. And I'd really like to have some of the tests done, but I've not gone. And I don't plan to go actually until the vaccine is here. Because I know that, if I avoid contact, physical contact, then I'm safer. Get into contact, even if it is for medical services. So that has happened, across certainly in the US, that has been the case, and therefore the hospitals that are specialized in things other than COVID are ailing in the US, and the US is full of private hospitals, so they are having a difficult time.
Our problem has been the lack of transportation. Because unlike US, where patient has option and is multiple options, every small places have got reasonably good hospitals. In India, the hospitals are very limited where people can go for tertiary and quaternary care. Our problem has been transportation, and we have realized there is no cancellation of healthcare seeking behavior, just a deferment. So we hope that once the lockdown opens, we'll get enough patients. What do you think? How do you react to it? Do you think it makes sense?
So once we get to normal, I think things will get back where they were. I firmly believe that in the end, the government will need to do some prioritization of health services. Public health will have to be strengthened a bit. That's my kind of thinking. That public health is very poor in India. You can see that there is one heavy rain and water collects. Even the drainage systems in the cities are clogged. And so you get 2 to 3 feet, perfect condition for mosquitoes to flourish. So those kinds of things we need to pay a lot more attention to. And really, the tendency is always to look to the central government, but these are issues for the local governments, meaning it's really not even a state government issue, it's really municipal government kind of issue. But unfortunately, at the state level and the municipal level, we tend to be very weak. But as so the private hospitals, I think which is where your question was probably. I fully expect things to return to normal. And in fact, there will be pent-up demand. People like me who have been waiting, that once the vaccine comes, I go and consult my doctor. They will all rush to the doctors, soon after, as soon as the situation begins to get normal. So I personally think that all we need is the vaccine.
Hope that we get the vaccine. And that's a very, very positive what you have said, that once the lockdown opens up, there'll be all the pent-up demands will be addressed and people will come to the hospital. Sir, would you like to recommend few things in healthcare sector for the government to be proactive on to improve the economics of healthcare sector?
Well, Dr. Roy, there are many things to do, and you, I'm sure, know a lot more about it than I do. I think our big problem is the revenues. There are so many competing, education people say that, from 4% of GDP, we want to raise it to 6% of GDP. Where are the revenues? How are you going to do it? Who are you going to cut? If you ask me, I would say that rather than take that from 4 to 6%, I would rather take that 2 percentage points and spend on public health. I think that's where the priority ought to be right now. because health is no less important than education. Both are important, but in education, we are at least doing it. And 4% of the GDP, if it is effectively used, I think it can go a good distance. And the problem in education is that the money is not being effectively used. Teachers who, large part of it is being given into teacher salaries, and teachers are absent from to beef up health. In health, our expenditure is very low compared to, we just do 1.2% of the GDP, which is far below, more 3-4% of the GDP. So we more in health than in education as far as public spending is concerned. So that's one. But I basically like if we can strengthen the Ayushman Bharat model. That's something I had advocated when I was there, because this was being discussed before I left the Niti Aayog, and Dr. Paul had joined us and so forth. So I was very much for the, both giving the patient the choice. You insure the patient up to a certain level, and then you both public and private hospitals that are covered by insurance, where you can seek services, and then the patient chooses, because that kind of model puts much greater pressure on the public sector to perform also, because they must compete against private sector. So I think that's a good model we have chosen, rather than one where we give all of it to the public sector. But that Ayushman Bharat net has to expand, and that is, I think, the big challenge. So if the services begin to look good, I would imagine that many individuals at their own expense would come to enroll in Ayushman Bharat, which should be the government's goal. That and remember that health, this is an insurance problem, and insurance gets cheaper the larger the pool of the patients. So as we expand it, the cost should at least some component of the cost will actually decline, purely in terms of the probabilities and so forth. And I think they'll also give boost to private hospitals yet further, private clinics, private hospitals, and so forth. Because right now, in the end, the private sector responds to demand. And right now, that unless enough people are insured, the demand tends to be weaker. So I would pitch for expanding and strengthening the Ayushman Bharat program.
Sir, very well said, sir. And thank you very much for thinking of Ayushman Bharat for the country. And as you said that the insurance, if it becomes cheaper. Sir, I have a last question for you, and I would like you to comment on that. Sir, the problem with the Ayushman Bharat has been, and the problem of Indian government when it comes to implementing any process where they have to link up with the private and the government both together for the caring of a poor patient, that the insurance becoming expensive and more expensive every passing day, number one. Number two, that government never does the real costing of it, of a surgery or any procedure. And they randomly pick up a rate and they want to implement it, which gets rejected by the majority in the country. As a result, that it never results in a very successful model. What would you like to say as economists, that how should government set up a rate for something which private world must accept it in healthcare?
Yeah. No, look, this is a problem. Health, because of this, very asymmetric kind of information. These are difficult areas. I mean, we got the US model where everything is private and all, and I certainly am not very happy with this this system here. Extremely expensive, and even then the services are kind of okay. So this is a problem. Costing is a major issue. Enforcement is another issue. Because we also our citizens are not so responsible either. They all try to game the system. Right? I mean, there is so much, even at the very low level of current insurance in Ayushman Bharat. There's so many of these scams that I read about. where hospital and the patient kind of make a deal and fleece the government and share the revenue when there was no service provided. So those sorts of things. But these are things we'll have to learn as we go. So it is going to be a rough ride. For 70 years, we have more or less neglected, healthcare. And it'll take a little while to get there. But these are problems you should raise. I think, what we should do is at these forums, we should raise these problems. And you being on the ground, you are in a much better position to do it. And so that the government becomes more aware. So this is where the private sector can actually be a very critical role.
Thank you very much, sir. Your views have been very, very useful. I'm sure it is being appreciated, and it will go a long way. And probably this voice will reach the government also in deciding about the future course of actions. We have neglected healthcare for 70 years, and we are paying a very heavy price today. I hope that in future we are better prepared and ready for it. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us today.